A number of years ago, I entered a competition that had been set up by none other than Ridley Scott. It was to write a short science fiction screenplay, presumably to get it made. And I wrote something and I submitted it. It was a short story called it was a short screenplay called The Series Configuration. And it didn't win, but the story itself I really liked. So I converted it from a screenplay into a short story. And I submitted it to a number of science fiction magazines. One picked it up, a magazine called Jupiter SF, and they published it, and it got some pretty decent reviews actually. And I started to follow up that story with other stories that featured the same characters. They were only 6,000 to 8,000 word stories, and I wrote some more of them. Got a couple more published in the same magazine, Jupiter SF. Thank you to Ian Redmond for that. And as I carried on writing around the universe that I'd created for these characters, it started to grow into something that was greater than something that could be used just for individual short stories in a magazine that were operating in isolation. So there was an interconnectedness between all the stories that kind of meant that it had outgrown that format in a way. Anyway, I wrote more stories and put them together in a collection, the Axiom Few. The cover of this book was drawn by my dad, actually. It was a pencil sketch. It looked really great on the page. And really love the cover for this. Anyway, so this is the short story collection. There's 8 in the story, 3 of which were obviously published in Jupiter SF. And the ones that were published got some really great reviews, and special mention to Rod MacDonald from SF Crow's Nest, who sadly passed away now, but he was a real champion of the stories. He thought Channel 4 should be making a series for this stuff. Anyway, he kindly wrote a foreword for this collection, and he was championing the stories all along. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to him. So the stories themselves, they surround a number of characters who form the Axiom Few. There's Archer, there's Davy, and there's Geek, the three main ones. And they are freelance techno graduates, young kids operating on the edge of science in a future London, maybe about 50 years ahead of now. And they operate out of what they call the test shack, which is a little shack that's underneath a motorway overpass 30, 40 miles outside London. In fact, that's what that picture is there. And they test all of these crazy devices that they've invented. And then they often get called upon by something called the Space Foundation. It's an entity that is tackling various threats from out there in the universe, or perhaps a little bit closer to home. And they use these devices to try and assist the Space Foundation with these challenges. And sometimes they succeed and sometimes they don't, or at least that there's sometimes a price to pay. Anyway, the stories were written around the time that I was working for an oil company and doing quite a bit of globetrotting at the time, and you can tell that a lot of the influences that I had from that travel and that work has found its way into sort of some of the globetrotting nature of these stories, from the Ascension Islands in the mid-Atlantic to Antarctica. I didn't go there. To southern France. That aspect of it is, gives it some good texture. But these science fiction stories, they're pretty out there. They're quite sort of pulpy in a way. There's a bit of comedy in them, but I like to think that they attack some very big ideas from a science fiction perspective. And in that sense, I think it's a bit of a rip-roaring read in that respect. It's not a very long book. It's 136 pages or so. I have actually written more stories after this, but not enough to make an additional collection. Maybe that's something for the future. Anyway, the Axiom Few.